Yeah, so let's start, or not start, but let's be in terms of the actual crash. Emiliano Sala came to Cardiff. He signed his contract. He was photographed with the Cardiff City shirt. You know, all the usual stuff. Um, I believe Neil Warnock. He said in the book, Neil Warnock asked him to stay. I think it was for the Newcastle game, but
Yes.
Emiliano said he would like to go home to put his dog into a kennel and prepare, just for his dog to come over to Cardiff, and he wanted to say goodbye to his teammates at Nantes. So and so he went back to Nantes. On a flight arranged. Was the flight over to France arranged by Willie Mackay or the Mackay team as well? I think they went, but
Yes.
they went over on that plane, didn't they? Because
Yes, they
Emiliano
did.
complained about I can't remember the exact terminology used, but I think it was it wasn't a comfortable flight on the way to France.
No, it wasn't apparently.
And
No, he said in fact that I think the pilot actually tweeted that he wasn't familiar with the controls, and Emiliano Sala said that it was really shaky fly over, and he wasn't relishing the return.
yeah, he didn't feel safe, I think was the exact wording of one of the messages, which that in itself, is concerning when you've got a pilot saying that he's not familiar with the controls. Like, to me, someone who's not really a fan of flying, I would do it if I have to, but not a massive fan of it. I wouldn't want to be seeing my pilot saying things like that. I've got to be honest. But there we go. So he goes. So Emiliano, he goes back to France. He says goodbye to his teammates. He puts his dog into the kennel. Cardiff offered to give him a flight back. I think it was the Sunday night, a British Airways commercial flight, and he would have been back in time for training. I think it was the Monday, wasn't it? But he turned that down. Do we know? I'm sorry, I'm trying to flick through the book, and I know I'm sort of going about a bit.
No, but it was a package really. The whole journey, the flight out, the return journey was arranged by the Mackays with that pilot, which was a pilot that wasn't the more experienced pilot. He was the almost like the stand-in pilot who could do it because the other guy couldn't do it. So the important conversation that we have recorded in the book is that one of his former teammates drove him to the airport, and
yes,
he confessed to him he was frightened for his life. And his teammate or former teammate at Nantes said, "Well, please text me as soon as you land because I'll be worried about you." And obviously, text never came through.
No. So just before we go on to the pilot, I wanted to just ask: do you know if it's ever been kind of said the reason why Emiliano didn't want to go on the British Airways flight over the private flight, particularly if he'd had, a not too pleasant experience coming over, or was that decision made before the flight to France?
Yeah, it was a package. It was a private flight going out and coming back because he was struggling, and the club was struggling to find any flight, British Airways or any scheduled flight that could get him back in time for the training. So while they were struggling with it, trying to search for the right kind of flights, William Mackay's son, who was playing at the club, texted Emiliano Sala, as you can see from the WhatsApp record, and the whole thing was arranged for him. And Emiliano Sala, what would the cost be? And he said nothing. Just create a few goals for me in the club. And it was a flight that was paid for by other people. So, which made it a commercial flight.
Yeah, which is of course another aspect to it, which we'll get to in a second. So, Willie Mackay has stated on numerous occasions that he's used the pilot David Henderson he's used him over the years regularly. He's always been his kind of go-to guy for flights like this. But for some reason, for this particular flight or night, David Henderson didn't fly the plane, which Willie Mackay says, that's what he thought, that's what he expected. And it was passed over to David. I'm really sorry if I pronounce his name incorrectly. David Ibbotson, who ended up flying the plane, who was he was a gas engineer, I believe it was, and a kind of part-time pilot. So with his pilot license, he can't fly commercially. Is that correct? Or is it the pilot license, or is it the plane that couldn't fly commercially? Which means, basically, if someone pays for if passengers pay for the flight, that makes it commercial, isn't it?
Correct.
So is it the pilot's license, or is it the plane which was not allowed to be commercial? Just to clarify.
The pilot. I mean, you had I think the plane was something like 36 years old. The pilot was colorblind, and therefore was not allowed to fly at night. His license prohibited him from flying at night. The flight was delayed, as we know, because he had to go back to his hotel, and then came back at 7:30 at night for the return flight, and he should never have been allowed to take off. The other point, of course, was it wasn't allowed to be a commercial flight. He was unfamiliar with the controls. He was a part-time plumber, a part-time DJ. But the fascinating point about it is we discovered that he had 4 county court orders against him. So clearly he was heavily in debt and needed the money. And therefore he was prepared to take these risks. What was he being paid to take these risks?
Indeed. I mean, whose responsibility is it to check that this pilot, he's colorblind, like you say, so he shouldn't have been flying at night. The plane is 36 years old, which will actually come into it in a minute when we get onto it a bit further into the story. Whose responsibility is it to check, that the pilot is, ship shape? Is he got the right license? Is he, colorblind or not? Is he safe to fly this plane at this time in this weather? Does he have the correct paperwork and qualifications? Whose responsibility is that, in real time?
Well, as the book points out, when they returned, he returned with the paperwork with his name as Henderson, not Ibbotson.
Which is, in this day and age, post 9/11 day and age, it is frightening that he was able, he's able to come back with paperwork with someone else's name on, and fly a plane. Like you say, he was colorblind, shouldn't have been flying at night, which does make you think, and I don't want to be disrespectful to the man, because it looks like he's lost his life. He hasn't been found. He's got a family who are, concerned and have been suffering unimaginable, grief and worry over the last year as they still search for answers and for his body as well. But it does make me wonder, how, like you say, how much was he getting paid to take those risks, and how much was he getting paid to step in for David Henderson, just simply because he would have known that he shouldn't have been flying at night. He would have been aware of that. He would have been, aware when he had the paperwork that Henderson wasn't his name. And I would be, obviously maybe we'll never know, but I would really be interested to know why he was willing to take those risks, or to make those errors, if you like.
Well, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you have read the conclusions of the book, and we are aware, of course, that 6 months ago the police arrested Henderson under caution in their deliberations on criminal manslaughter.
Yeah, David Henderson is an interesting one for me, particularly. I wasn't aware quite how elusive he had been, just from before I'd read the book. I mean, he's been very difficult to contact. I know journalists had been to his house and he'd kind of never been there, and then he kind of went off the map completely. Like you said, he was arrested by the police, but as far as I know, he's never given any public statement. Did he? I might have missed that. Did he give a public statement regarding, the fact that he wasn't the pilot, other than his? I know he posted a Facebook post around the time the plane went missing, because obviously at that time everybody thought he was flying the plane, and he put a Facebook post up to say.
The book points out, because it goes into the background of how these things are investigated.
Yes, yeah, of course.
So it isn't in the public domain, but it is in the book. The fact that his family took out a restriction order on the media approaching him or the family, because initially everyone thought he was the pilot and he had died.
Yes.
But then when it became clear that that wasn't the case, I think that restriction order no longer applied. But when, as you rightly say, and I've accounted how and when a number of journalists have turned up to try and find him, they can't find him.
And has he made any further statement since, those initial posts regarding, the fact that it wasn't him flying the plane? Has he ever made any statements, to say why he passed it over to David Ibbotson?
Well, the book points out, and again, another unknown fact, that the club, through their lawyers, had written personally to him and to his lawyers, requesting that he cooperated with the club in their inquiries.
Yes.
And he point blankly refused to answer anything.
Did he refuse, or did he just not answer? Do you know?
Well, his lawyers answered by just saying he's making no.
Yeah, to me, if I was in a situation where this has happened, I would want to do everything I could to cooperate with the people involved, because I would want to help the families who've lost loved ones, get the answers, the closure, whatever you want to call it, that they deserve and they need. And this is what kind of confuses me in a way, that there's a lot of people who have some answers, who are not saying anything, and that's an issue for me.
Well, I'm not. It's not for me, because my task, as you say, as an investigative journalist, is try and find the facts.
Yes, of course.
I may have an opinion, but that's irrelevant. So I'm reporting on what people are saying behind the scenes, what their conspiracy theories are, what they suspect. It's not what I suspect.
Yeah, of course.
And they suspect foul play. They suspect, like you suspect. Why would this man, if he had nothing to hide, why wouldn't he just give a press conference and tell everyone what he knows? So again, let me emphasise, it's not what I'm suspecting. I'm telling you what people who have every reason to know all the facts suspect. And they suspect he has an awful lot to hide. That's what they suspect. And if you look at the train of events that go from how he normally took a number of these flights, how and why he passed it on to somebody else, surely in his industry, in his profession, he would have known the problems of the pilot he passed it on to. Would he have reported that back to the source? Who was taking the risk? Why did he take the risk? Was he paying the pilot, or was somebody else paying him? Was there a third party paying him, and then a third party paying the pilot to do something other than what they should have been doing? These are all the theories, because there is a vacuum of information, because this guy won't come forward to give an explanation. So you could draw your own conclusions, and other people close to this matter are drawing their own conclusions.
Yeah, it's a massive shame, because out of all the people involved, whether loosely, directly, or anything, he's probably got the most answers to give, outside of if they'd been able to get the wreckage of the plane.
Why do you think? Why ask you this question? Why do you think he's so frightened to do that? Or frightened, reluctant, or won't? Why won't he?
So,
is he frightened?
In my opinion, there's two kind of options for me for that reason. One would be that he is frightened or intimidated into saying nothing for whatever reason by whoever. I'm not sure why, because the only facts I have really are facts from like your book and from newspaper articles and things like that, which I've read. But that would be one option for me, that he's frightened enough that he is saying absolutely nothing.
So when he was arrested by the police, what do you think he told them?
Well, if he was intimidated or if he's frightened, he probably said no comment to everything, I would imagine.
So would I. Yes, exactly. He told them nothing.
If he's not making a public statement in a situation like this, if he's got nothing to hide, etc., you would make a public statement, like you just said. And in that case, you would also, tell the police everything. The fact that he's saying that he's refused, not just saying, I don't want to talk about this, or I don't want to talk about this in public. He is saying, I will not make any comment whatsoever, says to me that he's probably saying that to the police as well. It would be very, very interesting if one day we get to see those police tapes and those interviews. I got a feeling we won't, unfortunately, but it'd be very interesting to hear, how cooperative he's being. And the other option would be if he, maybe there is a side to it where he feels responsible or he feels guilty because he passed the flight off to David Ibbotson. Whether that's a case of he didn't want to do the flight because for whatever reason, so he passed it on to someone else, and then obviously tragedy happened, and maybe he feels that guilt and responsibility.
Well, no, just don't lose sight of the fact the police were investigating criminal manslaughter and arrested him.
Yeah, which is that's the reason why my personal opinion is that there's some third party somewhere who he's afraid enough of that he's not saying anything. So in fact, he's, in my opinion, and obviously allegedly as well, he's so afraid of whoever or whatever that he's willing to be arrested and still perhaps not cooperate with the police, which is a bit of an issue for me. Going back to the flight, so they leave Nantes, and then obviously the radars and the powers that be in terms of the airport and the people who monitor planes, they lose track of the plane, and the reports break that the plane's missing. The player liaison officer from Cardiff is waiting at the airport. He reports that the plane hasn't arrived when it was supposed to. And the story breaks there, doesn't it? There's a missing plane, and it's not long before it's, said that the missing plane has got Cardiff City's new sign in. One of the things which we didn't know at that time when it was breaking, which actually was found out after they found Emiliano's body, was that he had a 58%, I forget the terminology, level of carbon monoxide in his system. And obviously when you get a certain percentage of carbon monoxide in your system, it's odorless, and you can't see it, you can't smell it. When you get a certain percentage of it into your system, it can cause blackouts, it can cause seizures, and nausea, and all sorts of very serious health problems. And he was well over the kind of percentage. I'm just trying to quickly click through and find the percentages, but there's like a certain percent where those things would kick in. And Emiliano's body had 58%, which was well over that, of carbon monoxide in his system when they did the autopsy, which says...
Well, there's a couple of points I should draw your attention to. First of all, no one would have ever discovered that because the aviation authorities had abandoned trying to salvage the bodies from the plane, and it was crowdfunded, and of course Vincent Tan also put some money in to repatriate the body, but there were funds put in to allow that evidence to occur. Otherwise, it would never have done so. I mean, do you not find that absolutely scandalous that the aviation authorities had to be funded or something privately funded to extract that kind of evidence? And of course, now we're at the situation where the aviation authorities, the government, did not salvage the plane. And now that they think they should do, because of what has been discovered in the player's body, it's disintegrated on the bottom of the ocean. Now, one would give the benefit of the doubt. I would imagine because of the currents and where it was, there was every chance it would disintegrate. Or, of course, as I point out in the book, one of my theories that I like, theories that I've reported that people discuss with me, was that deliberately dispersed at the bottom of the ocean. Because there can only be two possibilities how that poisonous gas got into the cockpit. Now, every plane that takes off is checked for mechanical problems, faults, anything like that. So one would assume this plane was before it took off. But, minutes after taking off, it has this unbelievable mechanical fault. So either it was a mechanical fault or there was another theory that's been put forward, how that gas got into the cockpit.
Which was?
Well, I think you can draw your own conclusions.
Yeah. So, look, that was actually what I was going to ask you, and you asked me, was the fact that the aviation authorities gave up looking for these two people, these two human beings and this plane, to me, and it wasn't, we're not talking 6 months down the line, so it's like they've expended every resource and every corner of the ocean.
10 days.
10 days of looking for two human beings who've gone missing in a plane, I think is disgusting. And I really, if I was the families of those two people, I would have been furious, and I would have been really upset. And you can understand why, particularly Emiliano Sala's family, feels so let down. And like you say, it was crowdfunded. They raised enough money to get an expert who was used to salvaging things like shipwrecks and things from the bottom of the ocean. He found it, I think, a few hours, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
Which makes the aviation authority look even worse. Well,
they still argue that they can come to, because they haven't come to their final conclusions yet.
Right.
And won't until March. They still argue that even without the wreckage, they can conclude their findings. I mean, that's bizarre and that's absurd. I mean, how are they going to know how that poisonous gas got into the cockpit? And therefore, once they've found out how, why? So I don't see how they can make a proper conclusion to their findings. I think it's impossible.
Well, yeah, because they can't find out how that gas got into the cockpit and the plane without having the plane. One question.
It's ludicrous. I mean, it's just ludicrous. I mean, and what people are concluding on that is the ridiculous nature of the fact that, oh, look, you said there's two sides to every story. So I give an explanation of why they say that was not possible. The weather conditions, the potential danger, and the enormous cost were the reasons given why they did not salvage the plane.
So here's my my answer to the thing about cost is if there was something at the bottom of the ocean in that exact spot, which was to benefit, say the country or to benefit someone in power, they would have gone to get it. If that makes sense. So I'm trying to think of something I can use in this example. If that was at the bottom of the ocean, they would have gone to get it, but I can't think of anything. But basically, if there was a big pot of gold, they would have gone to get it. If that makes sense. If there was something which they would have benefited them, they would have gone to get it. The weather, you can't do anything about the weather, but they managed to get the player's body. So to me, I know that it's a plane. It's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that it would have been cheap, but you have to get that wreckage to enable you to do a full analysis of what happened. And also, another point to that is, imagine that particular model of plane or that type of plane, that manufacturer of plane, if there's some sort of issue which could happen on other flights and cause the same problem with a carbon monoxide leak. Do you see what I mean? They should want to know exactly what went on.
When they abandoned the salvage operation for the plane, they didn't know that was going to come up. I think they must be hugely embarrassed to know that it has. And of course, that really angered the family to some tune. It really was, very, very hurtful. And the Emiliano's father died 3 months after what happened. The family are still traumatized. They do not have the answers. Because of what we've just discussed, potentially all we're left with is what I've been talking about in the book, is the theories, the conspiracy theories, what people are talking about. But we are deprived of absolutely vital evidence to find out what really happened.
Yes. Someone sent me a question kind of related. I'm going to bring this question in because it's related to what we were just talking about, specifically the carbon monoxide and some of the theories going round about that. And she asked if there's any evidence to suggest that the aviation authorities abandoned their search or refused to get the wreckage of the plane, not so much the search for the player, but after they found the player, refused to get the wreckage of the plane because this kind of third party or whoever, this conspiracy theory in some ways of someone else being involved, or the carbon monoxide, how it got onto the plane. Could it be possible that the aviation authorities left the plane wreckage there because they knew that the currents and the oceans would destroy it and destroy any evidence along the way?
No, I don't think so at all.
Yeah, I just they sent the question, so I thought I would ask it.
No, I don't think so. It's a very valid question, and one can understand why they thought that. But no, at that point they didn't know that the carbon monoxide was an issue. And they just gave the reasons. It was too expensive, too dangerous, the weather conditions were bad, it was in a different location, and they didn't think it was what they thought. They could make their findings without the wreckage. Clearly now they can't.
No, they can't. And this obviously is, like you say, a great embarrassment for them, and it's hurtful for the families involved. So obviously the crash has happened. They've recovered Emiliano's body eventually, and they've discovered the carbon monoxide. Obviously, this plane was, I think you said, 34 years old, which that in itself is, that's nearly as old as me.
Well, okay, look, you've got to say, let's be honest with ourselves. Who would put your record club signing? Who would be responsible for having a 15, 20 million pound footballer in a single engine jet flown by a part-time plumber who was colourblind over the channel.
Yeah, in bad weather.
Really, I mean, come on. I think when you reach all these conclusions and think about it, I think the title is very apt.
Yeah, it's obviously Cardiff didn't make the decision, did they, to send him on that plane at that time and that time of night. It was made.
No, they didn't.
And I wonder whether, if they'd had all the information, I would assume that they would have not been happy with it.
Agreed. I don't think they would.
And unfortunately, by the time they had that information, obviously it was too late. In your book, you've got several documents relating to different things. You've got WhatsApp messages between the player liaison and Emiliano Sala himself. It's thoroughly researched, and it is fascinating to read. I wanted to move on just now, just to some questions, because we had quite a few. Some of them are obviously the same. The same, like people are asking similar or the same questions. Did Cardiff City and Nantes help you with your book and the research? Were they quite willing to provide you with information and documents and things?
It is very difficult to answer that question. If you're an investigative journalist, you are very circumspect with your sources of information.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
So, if I was to answer that in any shape or form, I think that would not be the correct thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is the information in the book is, like I just mentioned, is thoroughly researched, and it's clear that you've spoken to people from various parts of this investigation, various parts of this situation, and it's clear that it's well researched, and you've spoken to people involved.